Welcome to Judaism Demystified, a podcast for the perplexed. Join us as we explore some of the most fascinating Jewish and Torah-related topics with our esteemed guests. By tackling some of the biggest questions you likely won't find addressed elsewhere, we aim to shed light on important issues and inspire a return to the fundamentals. Enjoy the show. Thank you for joining the Judaism Demystified podcast. Rabbi Grossman, could you start by briefly introducing yourself and explain why demystifying halakha is so important for contemporary Jewish practice?
Okay, well, I'm Avi Grossman. I'm not necessarily a full-time demystifier of halakha. I'm actually a more full-time Kollel student, part-time publisher of Sparm. I have my own Sparm. I'll tell you about it a little bit afterwards. But why do we want to demystify halakha? Why is it important? Because I guess we've encountered a certain malaise in Judaism. When you have halakha that's mystified, as you guys would put it, it leads to the situation where you have an elite can control the masses in, I guess, a sinister way. Okay, it's like any other system where the knowledge is kept, or perhaps the authority to decide certain things is kept by a select group, a minimal group, a self-selecting group, and the people who should perhaps be deciding on their own, or at least having a say in the decision, or at least knowing how the decision is made, they have no say, and they don't even know if they're perhaps being taken the wrong way. You know about the whole Das Torah controversy from about 20 years ago or so, right?
Yes.
So if halakha is kept in the realm of only a select few who can somehow decipher it, so Am Yisrael becomes paralyzed when parts of halakha become rusty. So I don't think we're at a loss for certain examples regarding this. The most important one, which is now, thank God, we've already gotten past that. Okay? It was an issue that for a while was a major one, was holding back Am Yisrael and actually perhaps even killing Am Yisrael. And I mean that most literally, led to the deaths of millions, was, let's say, Halakhic Anti-Zionism. Let's move back a few years. There was an idea that Am Yisrael should start its own state in the land of Israel, right? That seems like a pretty interesting idea for those of us who grew up in the 20th century and now the 21st century. This is something that we're used to it. We know about this. We had basic flag waving Zionism as part of our education back in Jewish day school. But let's say 100 years ago, 120 years ago, that idea was almost foreign to many Orthodox Jews, right? Mm-hmm. Even though you can possibly study Torah on your own and realize, yes, like Rabbi Avi says, Am Segula, if you want to be a Mamlechet Kohanim, that means a kingdom of priests. A kingdom has a country, it has a land, it has a people, and its own defined borders. These are basic premises of keeping the Torah. But because Am Yisrael was in the diaspora, not as a functional nation, but as just an ethnic group that kept to a certain cultural standards, what we call Torah, so they were distanced from this. And then when those who were detached from the Torah came up with this new idea to perhaps found a state just like any other national group, so this suddenly became into the realm of halakha, and many of those who were in the know of halakha were saying that this type of idea is forbidden, right? They said that we cannot have a state. We're not supposed to be doing any of these things that these secular Zionists were proposing. And what did that lead to? Like Rav Schechter said, this led to the mistake that many Jewish people, especially in Europe, when the threat of Nazi annihilation was at their doorstep, they still stayed put in Europe because they had put themselves into this box that we've been told that this whole evacuate to the land of Israel, try to found a state, do something, maybe even create an army to defend ourselves. All of these things are part of one forbidden package. And that was a big problem, right? And I think the analogy today is we're holding ourselves back from proceeding with prosecuting a critical war because of this. There are many people who are stuck. I think the overwhelming, let's say, Haredi world, I think rightfully so to a certain extent, believes that we cannot join an army and fight for our defense, right? It's either IDF or bust. They have this false dichotomy. The IDF is paschal, and I could give you many reasons. I have a list on my computer, 30 reasons, right off the top of someone else's head, to which I've added. But we do know that we have to fight to survive. So we're holding ourselves back. We're holding ourselves back from building a Beis Hamikdash because we've been told, the rabbis told us you can't go to Har Bayis. Somehow, even though we read the Torah all the time and we're commanded to build a temple and have a functioning temple service every single day, right? What's the most important pasuk in the Torah according to Chazal? Consistency. That's a keves echad tasev aboker. That machlokas Chazal. What's the most important pasuk in the Torah? Anochi Hashem Shema Yisrael. And one of the candidates was lamb in the morning and lamb in the afternoon. So these are basics of Torah, but we're now stuck, right? Too many Jews, too many rabbis believe that these are things that are off the table. Somehow the only way we could 100 years ago get back to the land of Israel and have a country was somehow or other a miraculous Messiah would come. Only the Messiah could bring us to the state where we could have a country. And nowadays they say only Messiah could somehow prosecute a war against our enemies. Only Messiah could somehow let us back to the Temple Mount and build a temple. And without Messiah, it's off the table. By the way, this is the position of the now former chief rabbi. He wrote this explicitly. And what he's writing is, if not the explicit opinion, it's the implied opinion of the masses of Orthodox Jews, as you know, and as you could figure out. So the mystified halacha keeps us paralyzed, and demystifying the halacha makes other people wake up, makes the masses wake up to perhaps halacha as we know it today, as we perceive it, should be different. I think, by the way, that's one of the things that Rabbi Barchim has been trying to do. He's been trying to get people to wake up, perhaps think on their own, or at least go back to the sources, wake up and realize that God wants more from us. A mystified halacha, just like I said, you could choose your paralysis, or you can escape it.
Can you? You mentioned this Chazal with what are the three most important psukim in the Torah. I wasn't familiar with this Chazal. Is this in the Gemara somewhere? Is this a midrash?
Yeah.
It's in a Gemara. Can you just 2 seconds just go through that one because it's really interesting.
Well, okay. You want to let's diverge here. I don't have it in front of me.
It's just so interesting. You brought it up and I wasn't familiar. And I'm like, wait, I want to hear more about that.
I'll give it to you outside because normally I prepare
Sure. Yeah.
Rashi and put it on the screen, but that's not one of the things I have here. I've got it on Pesach and other stuff. So let's go through this. Chazal have sometimes like to simplify things. They like to give you a list, and they give you mnemonics. The Mishnah itself is a sing-song. I don't mean that in any flippant way. I mean that's a way. It's saying that the children would chant, and then adults would continue to saying it over and over until they memorized it. The Mishnah is shorthand halacha, and from your knowledge of the Mishnah by heart, and then your ability to analyze it, what we call Talmud, you could understand the halacha, and that's the way it existed for quite a few centuries. So, as part of the Talmud, we find these shortcuts for memory. Rabbi Akiva was talking about how, for example, after Re'acha Kamocha, that klal gadol b'Torah. That's a good starting point, because once you have that halacha, you can perhaps derive all the other rules you need to know about ben adam lachavero, right? Not Beis Shammai, actual Shammai. The people are trying to convert. And they asked Shammai and asked Hillel. Shammai didn't have any patience for someone who's telling him, teach me all the Torah regalachas. But Hillel was able to sum it up and say, once you understand this general rule, which is a concise rule in the Torah, perhaps you can become more interested and realize how all the other rules flow from that. So Chazal had this idea that are there perhaps, and by the way, we shouldn't hold this way halacha, because then we'll actually take it to the wrong conclusion, is that perhaps certain mitzvot, certain verses of the Torah are more important than others. Now, we certainly don't believe that, right? That was the problem with people standing for the recitation of the Ten Commandments. We read about Maimon Har Sinai now, according to our minhag, 3 times a year in the synagogues. Whenever the Parshas V'eschana and Yisro roll around, and also on Shavuos. But there is a practice that you've probably seen that's when the congregation stands.
Yeah.
It's slightly problematic because it might be implying, we're demonstrating that perhaps these verses are more important, so to speak, than others. And there have been heretical sects throughout history that have made such claims. And we don't want to do like the heretics. But there is this idea that Anochi Hashem Elokecha has within it such a profound idea from which all the other ideas flow that, in a sense, it is more important, at least from an intellectual standpoint. So there were among the sages those who offered what's the main verses of the Torah, the ones the slogans, the ones that can work. So they suggested ones like Shema Yisrael. Why is that is the declaration of the faith. That's when you're supposed to teach children first. Or, like I said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. And I like to hit on the idea that all the ideas that were offered until that point do have a certain centrality. Okay? God, Anochi Hashem Elokecha and Shema Yisrael, those are big ones. But this idea of Ez hakeves echad ta'aseh b'boker v'eth hakeves hashni ta'aseh ben harbayim, offer the first lamb in the morning and the second lamb in the afternoon, a reference to the times when the Tamid is offered. That's the daily offering. Every single day of the year, you're supposed to have a lamb in the morning, lamb in the afternoon offered in the temple as a burnt offering. So that also has a certain centrality to it because it teaches you the lesson of consistency in Avodat Hashem. The biggest test of any Jew is, what does he do Motzei Yom Kippur? All right? After all that tshuva, Aseres Tshuva are over. You've been saying slichus. Maybe some people have been saying for 40 days. And yet yesterday was the culmination. And the day afterwards, suddenly there's no slichus, there's no tachanun, and now it's time to get ready for a holiday. Do people show up to synagogue on time, also first thing in the morning on the 11th of Tishrei? Do they daven with the same kavanah? Every single day, Yom Kippur, the service of Yom Kippur and the service of Wednesday are at least identical in this respect. The first service and the closing service, they're all the same. Yeah, there's a lot in the middle that's specific to Yom Kippur. But the beginning and the end, day in, day out, same time, same place, every single day. That's an important principle in halakha. We don't take vacations from serving God. You don't get a day off to say, you know what, today I'm going to sleep late and miss Shacharis and I'm not going to put on tefillin. There's no such thing. So that's why. And also, by the way, you're Talmud Torah. There's no such thing as going a day without studying Torah. Yeah, it could be some sort of emergency, but l'chachila, not post facto. You should have Torah study every single day. You should be educating children every single day. There's no such thing as a day off from Torah study for the children even. You guys heard about that perhaps the adults, they could be excused if they don't have time to study, once again, on Erev Yontif or Erev Shabbos. But there's no such thing as a day off for Tinogos Shel Beis Rabban. Even to build a Beis HaMikdash, you don't take time off to teach the students. I think the Zilbermanses, those who followed his derech, they've taken this to what the Vilna Gaon believes to be the proper, not the absurd conclusion, the proper conclusion that there really is no day off from yeshiva except, unfortunately, Tisha B'Av, if it is a fast day. And there is no Talmud Torah.
Yeah, it seems like I think to echo your point, I think the point that you're trying to make, I hope I understand, is basically that when it comes to, in order to become a proper Jew, we have to understand that it's something that has to be ingrained in our everyday consciousness and life. It's not something we pick and choose when, or have high moments, low moments. I mean, that comes within a certain, right? We have our higher moments in Chagim, but there are, it's a way of life. It's a way that it's a dedication. It's a dedication to a certain way of life approach. And by doing that, we also, it refines us.
Yeah. We learned this lesson, especially from the Kohen Gadol. His day he has to work is Yom Kippur, but every single day he's in the temple. The Rambam says that says Gadol Tifarto. Every single day he's at the temple. He's wearing the same, glorious clothing every single day. Every single day he's in charge of the service. There is no difference. By the way, I discovered this personally. When you have children, you have to keep a routine, right? Even if you want to be slow one morning, you can't do that with the kids. They're going to need to get to school or whatever it is, so you can't take off from them. One of the problems that perhaps many men have in trying to develop this constancy in serving God is the multiplicity of options where you could daven shacharis. How many of you know, if you live in a good Jewish community, it doesn't really matter what time you wake up. Even on Shabbos, you don't have to set an alarm. If you wake up anytime between 4 a.m. and 9 a.m., you could run somewhere and find a minyan for Shabbos, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's true. Thank God. It's a good thing. We even have minion factories now. That's a good thing. However, if you tell yourself that you were always going to daven Vasikin, let's say, why do the Vasikin? Oh, they're known for, they always daven at sunrise. By the way, that's when they offered the Korban Tamid in the Beis Mikdash. Why are they always davening at sunrise? What does that lead to? It leads to this, a person commits himself to keep the Torah, to keep this particular mitzvah every single day, no matter what. The Ramah brings an interesting minhag that I'm surprised that people want, sometimes are sticklers. I find people, Ramah says this minhag Ashkenaz, you have to keep to it. The Ramah says that we have a minhag to daven later on Shabbos morning. Indeed,
Right.
that's what you see, right? That's the minhag.
A lot of shuls start at like 9:30 because I think of that Ramah.
Okay, yeah, or especially in Brooklyn. I found that in Brooklyn they daven later than they do in Queens, and in Jerusalem they daven slightly earlier. Here, the late minyan on Shabbos is like 8:30. That's the late one, except for the Chabad minyan. But you understand that. Wait a minute. Let's say you have a minyan you always daven Vasikin. How do you keep the Ramah's minhag? The Ramah's minhag doesn't fit. If you daven Vasikin every single day, then you cannot daven later on Shabbos. And on the contrary, your Vasikin minyan on Shabbos technically has to start earlier. It depends on how you define start, by the way. Your Vasikin minyan on Shabbos, because you have longer Pesukei de Zimra, and you have Nishmas, and even the Birkos Kriyas Shema are slightly longer, you need to give yourself more time to start. If on Shabbos, if you want to hit, Vasikin, you want to hit Shmon Esrei right at sunrise. So they're mutually exclusive. It's either you keep this proper minhag. And by the way, davening Vasikin in the morning, among the poskim, is it a hider mitzvah? Is it a chumrah? Is it a chasidus? Or is it ikra din? You could read the Rambam as saying this is ikra din. This is the only lichatchila way to daven. And every other time of service, either davening, let's say 10 minutes before sunrise because you got to run somewhere, or davening an hour later, those are b'diavad. Those are only post facto, perhaps not even justified on a regular basis. So it doesn't work out. You have to choose minhag Ashkenaz as reported by the Ramah, or you have to choose this commitment to want to daven the way they did in the temple. By the way, it's reported that Vilna Gaon himself always davened nates. So obviously he didn't keep to this minhag here. Why? Consistency and constancy. So I found that I'm not such a big tzaddik. I'm not into midat chasidut, and I don't have regular Hasidus practices, despite my genetic roots. But I found that because of necessity, because of the family necessity, and also societal obligations, also things related to work and other commitments, I had to daven Vasikin for a few years, every single day, including Shabbos. And I found that the benefits of doing so were much greater than, let's say, keeping to a schedule whereby I could go daven whenever I want, even on Shabbos, depending on when I get up and what happens with the kids, etc. Sticking to Vasikin, and I even saw this, those who succeed most in scholarship, in learning and hasmada, stick to the first thing, davening first thing in the morning, right at Vasikin time. And by the way, if you haven't, I encourage even Balabatim, you will waste your Shabbos. If you're going to daven American style, let's say you start at, like you said, 9 o'clock, you're wasting your Shabbos. You miss so much time for learning. The ikar of Shabbos is to have, by my calculations, once again, within the Rambam, is you should be spending about 9 hours total between Shacharis, Mincha, and Beis Medrash time every single Shabbos. 9 seasonal hours, by the way. And if you do not wake up for Vasikin and start the day right, then you will miss out. How many people wake up late on Shabbos and then they go to a long shlepi balbat minyan, and eventually afterwards they're going to eat, and they're going to eat some heavy food and maybe even drink something that's alcoholic with it, and then they'll knock themselves out for a long Shabbos nap, and then it's later in the afternoon, maybe they'll learn something or other, but they missed such a great opportunity to maximize their Torah study. Whatever, that's a different subject. I find that the concept built into the mitzvos actually are a guide. They help us maximize our potential in Torah study. You had a question there?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that this is even a universal rule that the early risers in general, and just in the real world, they're more successful. I mean, I think there are statistics that show like you won't find billionaires who wake up at 9. It's just not. They're all usually they're early risers.
Success follows the early risers. So whether
What's
it's religious
Chazal's
success
example?
or what?
Yeah. Because I'll have an example of late risers. We're the late risers. By the way, the Zman Kriyas Shema. You could Kriyas Shema is up until the end of the third hour, right? So Chazal said, how do you know that? Because the biblical standard of Zman Kriyas Shema is Uv Kumecha, when you get up in the morning.
So there's some late risers.
A regular person, the Rambam says, regular people get up at dawn, and dawn is an hour or so before sunrise. But there are Bnei Malachim. They even wake up later in the morning, 3 hours later than everybody else. So technically speaking, that's still Zman Kriyas Shema. We're the Bnei Malachim. Bnei Malachim don't have to work for a living.
Right.
Okay? So they're pampered. They don't have anything to do. They're not trying to get anywhere in the world because they were given it on a silver platter. But for the rest of us, perhaps we shouldn't be waking up like Bnei Malachim, even though all of Am Yisrael are technically Bnei Malachim to the extent that they have that dignity and they're deserving to be respected as such, and other halachic nafkaminas, but they're not actually Bnei Malachim to the extent that they're all incredibly wealthy. So,
all right. You emphasize that the entire Torah was always meant to be practiced, even the ones that don't seem to apply today. How does this concept shape our understanding of halakha?
Well, first of all, we ought to keep the entire halakha, right? Isn't that, I think Rambam even has it as one of the articles of the faith that you're not supposed to say that, okay, some of the Torah is now no longer in practice or was not meant to be. Even though the sages did tell us that, yes, there were some mitzvahs that were not ledoros. Example, you guys read yesterday, there was this rule in the parsha at the end of Maseh that it said that if a woman were to somehow inherit real estate, real property from her father, why? Because the father doesn't have any sons, so she's supposed to marry within the family so that the estate doesn't eventually fall into the realm of another tribe, right? That seems to be a pretty strong statement in the Torah. It seems to be that that's what Moses commanded the children of Israel. Yet, is there such a halakha on the books? Today, if you have a man who owns, let's say, quite a lot of property here in the land of Israel, and he passes away without any sons, and his daughters are his sole heirs, are we going to tell his daughters that they have to somehow marry within his known family? Is there such a halacha? No. So what was going on? What was this commandment there? The commandment was a one-time dispensation. But we also know that everything else in the Torah was actually given to be kept in all times and places. And by the way, this is one of the major reasons why people like the Rambam did say that this is a fundamental principle of our faith, that the Torah is eternal and there's no such thing as commandments falling into disuse or no longer applicable, is because there was a major offshoot Jewish heretical sect that became a major world religion that actually made such a claim. That's Christianity. Christianity basically said, now if you want to be, what they call God, if you want to get in God's favor, so what do you have to do? You just have to believe and a few other things, but you definitely don't have to keep the whole slew of commandments that the children of Israel still keep, perhaps mistakenly, according to their claim, right? So we need to keep the entire halakha. Too much what I call public policy halakha, whether it's within Haredi land or religious Zionist community, says that the ways, for example, once again, of temple times are not for us. And does anybody here keep Tuman Tara? What do they call someone who used to keep the laws of Tuman Tara within his house? He would eat his food in ritual purity. They called him a haver. It literally means a friend or a member of a distinct club of scholars, or those who were being pious, who wanted to keep their food in their houses up to a standard so that Kohanim, who have to eat their food in purity, especially if they have truma around the house, could also eat of their food. And also so that they would be ready to eat of sacrificial foods. Now, this practice of keeping ritual purity within the house was something that persisted even a few centuries after the destruction of the temple. It even persisted in places in Babylon, despite the fact that if you're in Eretz Amim, that means abroad, you're outside the land of Israel, the sages instituted, they enacted that just being there contaminates you. Being in Eretz Amim contaminates you ritually to a certain extent all the time. But aside from that, people used to keep these halachas. This was a critical part of Judaism. Nowadays, most people do not know or have any concept of ritual purity. There's one with one and a half glaring exceptions. The first exception, the actual exception, is tumas nida. People still keep this rule. They know that a woman who has had her usual cycles, so she eventually does have to go to the mikveh for immersion, the ritual bath for an immersion, in order to remove a certain extent of that impurity. And there are men who go to mikveh for their own reasons, personal reasons, but even then they don't really go to the real mikveh, and they don't try to then keep themselves ritually pure afterwards, right? That's actually the problem with the Hasidic idea of dunking tumas keri every single day, because the point originally was the inconvenience of having to remove the ritual impurity and going to the ritual bath would keep one from immediately recontaminating himself. Who's supposed to learn, oh, I now want to stay in this state of impurity and perhaps reduce his activity, reduce his activities that would involve becoming ritually impure. I'm saying this in very, PG type of method. But the point was, you're supposed to avoid certain things. They didn't want a person to be like, they say, like a rooster. But now we've confused ourselves. We made it easy to purify, so now there's no reason not to become impure, and that's not the intention of Chazal or of the Torah. So I mentioned that temple times also. Why did people keep themselves ritually pure? So they could involve themselves with temple-related commandments. If you were not a Kohen, you didn't eat truma around the house. The only real reason you would need to maintain ritual purity is so that when the holidays roll around, you could participate in the consumption of the sacrifices. Or when you go on pilgrimage, you can participate in the consumption of the sacrifices, right? But nowadays, we don't do it. It hasn't been done in quite a while. It wasn't done in Europe. It wasn't done in Morocco and Tunis. So what's happened? So people forgot about it, and they're even saying that perhaps maybe it should not come back. Like I told you guys a few minutes before, they make this claim. So Messiah is not here. Only the Messiah can somehow bring these halachas back. But for now, they're not for us, and they're missing out. There are some who make this claim, by the way, of about living in the land of Israel and keeping the commandments concerning the land of Israel, what they call mitzvot hatluot ba'aretz, which are usually the agricultural commandments. You need a land in order to keep these commandments. I don't know where you guys are sitting right now, but I do remember that
We're in New York.
You're in New York. When I was living in New York, I even in Rosh Yeshiva say, I remember I was hearing a speech. You do not have to move to the land of Israel because you could keep all your commandments here in New York, and they're not forcing you to do any averos. But that's not entirely true. You can't keep Shemitah. You can't separate Trumas and Maasros from your food. You can't do anything that the Torah actually wanted you to do here in the land of Israel. And you certainly can't be involved in the rebuilding of the temple, which, by the way, according to many who have now actually looked into this and they're waking up to this fact, we are supposed to be building a temple even today. Yes, it's a commandment that is incumbent upon the community and its leadership. So a guy like me, I can't just do anything about that. But there are people who are taking concrete steps toward the reinstitution of the temple and the sacrificial service. People look at Machon Mikdash, they think that they're a little bit kooky, a little bit on the fringe, but they have created, as you know, kelim, the actual temple implements for use in the temple. That's a very good thing that they should do. I know that they're collecting funds to rebuild the temple. And
it's an amazing place. It's an amazing place. I was in Eretz Yisrael in the summer, last summer. I took my daughters there, and especially my older daughter. It was like mesmerizing. It was unbelievable. You just see it all of a sudden with your eyes, and it's like all of a sudden like wow, and it just has some sort of effect. It's hard to explain what, but it kind of makes you want to realize it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not just a theoretical concept. It's there. You know what I mean?
Torah is not meant to be theory. You'd ask that, always meant to be practice. How does it shape our understanding of halakha? If you're just reading Gemara for the sake of knowing what the Gemara says, that's kind of good. That's considered to a certain extent lishma. But lishma also involves lomod lasot ulakayim. You have to want to be able to put this into practice. You have to go beyond, okay, so how will this affect me in real life? When you praise God every morning, Baruch Hashem, we learned the Rambam. Rabbi Cyril said, your main Torah study of halakha should first start with the Rambam. You know, Birkos Torah in the morning. You're supposed to praise God say the blessings before studying Torah. The Rambam formulates that as one who wakes up early in the morning, mashkim lilmod, someone who wakes up earlier than normal prayer services. Why? Because if he wakes up, he just has enough time to get to Shacharis, so there's no specific blessing on studying Torah before studying Torah. He's not sitting out to study Torah. Apparently, it's covered by the blessing that immediately precedes Kriyat Shema, correct?
Yep.
And that's what we see it is. Mishmor lasod kaim lemod. It involves learning and teaching and trying to somehow keep these commandments and to guard them and pass them on to the next generation. These are all facets that have perhaps been, I dare say, lost on many people. We've become so disconnected from certain aspects of the Torah. So how does it shape our understanding of halacha? If you open up your Gemara and realize that the sages here were actually talking, for the most part, unless it was an agadic passage, they were actually trying to get to the bottom of what should be done. Halacha is not a word, by the way. If I'm not mistaken, it's not in Tanakh, right? Halacha is comes from, it's a new Hebrew word, relatively new. It's a Mishneh Hebrew that comes from the Aramaic hilchata, which is just halacha in Hebrew. But what did hilchata mean to the sages who were using it? It's from the pasuk haderech yelechuva. It's the path upon which they should go. Halakha. You can see the obvious Hebrew word there, Hebrew shoresh, the root word, hey lamed kaf. That's how one walks. The Torah, and when it refers to commandments and what we refer to halacha, it's called also to use the word Torah, Torot, or Torotav and Torotai. The shoresh there is yud resh hey. It means instruction. What's the difference between instruction and halacha? Instruction is, I guess, from the point of view of the one doing the speaking. Moshe Rabbeinu instructs us. He gives us a Torah, tells us what to do. Halacha means when we put it into practice. So Torah is more of the study, and halacha is, once again, how you put it into practice. If you disconnect halacha from Torah study, then you will not know what to do ever. And that, like I said, leads to, once again, paralysis. There are many people, they like studying about what to do in Eretz Yisrael, but then they just stay in New York or other places in Chutz La'aretz. It had never crossed their mind, perhaps someone's waiting for me to actually put this into practice. Yeah.
On the topic of practice, you want to get into Mishneh Torah for a minute. I'm going to combine two ideas that you can elaborate on. So can you elaborate on how Harambam's Mishneh Torah differs from other halachic codes, particularly in its approach to describing practices like observing Pesach with a paschal lamb and what to do in its absence? And also, if you can also explain, how does the Mishneh Torah aim to complete code to be a complete code for all generations and all aspects of halakha?
Well, I think that was Rambam's goal. He wanted to include the final bottom line halacha as understood from all the Talmudim. By the way, he says, how do you get to halacha? You follow the Rishomi, the Bavli, the Tosefta, and the Mishnah. And everything that's post-Bavli is not necessarily binding. And you also have to know how the Gaonim understood these things. The Rambam's main Gaon, his main tradition, was that of the Rif, as you know. Okay? It was his father learned from the Ri Migash, who learned from the Rif, and that's how the Rambam learned. So he's trying to make it a compendium of everything that was ever paschal before. And he doesn't leave anything out, by the way. Although the Ashkenazim do possess certain practices that makes you scratch your head. How is it that these things disappeared among certain groups? I'm referring to, let's say, reading the other Megillas. Everybody has Eichel and Esther, but there's 3 other Megillas you're supposed to read on the holidays, and we have a tradition. It's mentioned in Sefas Sofrim. That's what they're there for. Yet Rambam seems to not have had these things. It must have been lost. By the way, the Rambam assumes that we will have a Jewish country in the land of Israel with a Jewish king and a proper Sanhedrin and also a court system and a temple and a priesthood. And that's how he writes it. He writes it and as though that reality is, even though if it wasn't in front of him, he knew it was going to become something in front of him. And then only afterwards does he have, but if you don't have such an ideal state, then here's what you do otherwise. The best example I found was, I remember when I started studying this 14 years ago, was Pesach lechatchila, and this is actually something that's close to my heart. The way the Rambam describes how you should be conducting your Seder. Everybody who's Jewish and not Jewish had an experience with a Pesach Seder, right? And we all know that the basics, the Manish Tana, and there's matzah and bitter herbs, and they're singing, and everybody knows the tunes. But the Rambam does not describe that. If you open up in Mishneh Torah at the last chapter of Hilchos Chametz Matzah, he actually describes how to conduct the Seder in Jerusalem with the Korban Pesach on the table. And that's why I realized, you know what? When we have Korban Pesach, we'll have to get ourselves a new Haggadah that's actually updated. You can't take your Maxwell House Haggadah, the one that Moses gave us from Sinai, or the Art Scroll Haggadah. You can't take those to your Seder with Korban Pesach. It actually tells you to do the wrong thing. It's incorrect. That's what you do when you don't have Korban Pesach. And by the way, even in temple times, there are many Jews who did not have Korban Pesach. Anybody who was outside Jerusalem and anybody who was contaminated in some way, even Jews within Jerusalem who did not qualify for Korban Pesach, they did the Seder that we have done in years past. But those who actually merited, and the sages say, millions of people actually did this every year. Those pilgrims who actually had Korban Pesach, they did a Seder that was entirely different. And that's why I decided to publish such a thing. Basically, what looks like a standard Ashkenazic Haggadah, trying to keep as many of the texts and minhagim and even the halachas with which we are familiar, but making it fit the way the Rambam and others describe how we are supposed to conduct the service if Korban Pesach is already on the table. So that became Haggadah Pesach, which, by the way, you could get at some bookstores, and you could also get it from me. I'm very proud of it. Thank God. I wasn't a one-man show, by the way. After I put it together, I ran it by Rabbi Moshe Tzuriel and Rabbi Eliyahu Weber. Rabbi Tzuriel is the Bala Otzros. He passed away just this year. It's now been 12 months since his passing, and I don't want to talk about that too much because it makes me too emotional. And they had a lot to say. They changed around a few things. They had their additions. There was some back and forth. And we published it right at the beginning of 2020. And I said that this year we're going to use this Haggadah every single year. We've been excited. It's going to be, we almost are this close to having Korban Pesach. I would think from a strictly Halakhic standpoint, if we haven't had Korban Pesach, certainly in the last decade, it's not because of any technical Halakhic reason. All the pieces have been in place according to those who have been studying the matter. Korban Pesach is something we could go through with. We have Kohana, we have Big Day Kahuna, we have a way to build an altar. The only thing that's stopping us is politics, basically. The regime does not let us do it. They send policemen to stop people from doing it. By the way, when you read the Rambam in Mishneh Torah, you see that what he is describing is the Seder with Korban Pesach. And then he says, and if you don't have Korban Pesach, Bizman Hazeh, you're stuck somewhere, so you do, and then he describes what you find in your Art Scroll and Maxwell House Haggadahs. So that shows you that, unlike, let's say, if you'd open up the Tur or the Shulchan Aruch and all the commentaries on it, including and up to the Mishnah Berurah and the Aruch HaShulchan, and all of, well, I don't have the bookshelf behind me now, I'm not in the base matters, but I have a bookshelf behind me. And all those Halakhic Sfarim are discussing how to conduct a Seder without Korban Pesach, right? Everybody who's everybody, and even everybody who's a nobody has his own Haggadah Shel Pesach, not Haggadah Pesach, Haggadah Shel Pesach. You've seen everybody's published his own. They all assume there is no Korban Pesach. The Rambam doesn't. You also look in Hilchos Sanhedrin. You can open up a Yoredeah, you can open up in a Choshen Mishpat, and they'll tell you about how to run Jewish courts, how Jewish courts have been run since late Talmudic times and throughout medieval times, and times of Shulchan Aruch, and even until today, throughout most of the world. That's how a Beis Din is run. But the way the Rambam opens it up, what he calls Hilchos Sanhedrin, not Beis Din, he calls it Sanhedrin. And he talks about the corporal punishment. He even includes that in the title, the punishments that they're supposed to inflict on people, of which they have 5. And then you see that the Rambam is actually imagining a Jewish community in the land of Israel with a properly functioning Sanhedrin, with minor Sanhedrins in every town. And from there, it's basically I guess it's like a fractal system that in Chutz La'aretz, the Batei Din that they have are offshoots, and they're working on the authority of what's supposed to be the Batei Din and the Sanhedrin within the land of Israel, and how every tribe is supposed to have its own Sanhedrin. That's how the Rambam starts, and then he goes into Hilchos Edus, etc., just like you could find in the other codes. But for the Rambam, the Chachila, the starting point is we have a Sanhedrin, and only if we do not have a Sanhedrin, we don't have proper Batei Din in the cities, then he talks about other situations. You look in Hilchos Melachim, it's also the same thing. What is the Rambam's assumption? Hilchos Melachim. What are you supposed to do? Jewish people are supposed to have leadership, right? He doesn't take the approach that a king is perhaps something that's only lechatchila, like Netziv says, perhaps it's fitting for certain societies and certain places. Perhaps maybe that's a monarch. If you translate king as monarch, yes, I would agree that perhaps a monarch is not something we're supposed to have all times and places. But if you translate king as, central leader, like a Yeshua, who didn't wear a crown, it wasn't anointed, and didn't have a lot of the trappings of what you and I imagine as a king, then we understand that, yes, this is something that is critical, something that's eminently necessary. And only if we don't have a king, okay, then we have to somehow get along some other way. And by the way, it led to another mistake there. Those who think that in order to conduct a war of defense, Am Yisrael, to defend itself from an enemy, let's say Nazi Germany, or imagine somehow there was Nazi Germany next door to the land of Israel today that was actually trying to destroy Am Yisrael, or a few Nazi Germanys. There are some people who honestly believe that because we do not have a Davidic king, we are stuck. We cannot organize an army to defend ourselves. And with none due respect, I think that's nonsense. Am Yisrael are supposed to defend themselves. It's already Halakha and Shulchan Aruch. And we are to organize an army if we don't have a king. So we have to have some other leader to get us to fight against those who would try to destroy us and our families and our country.
What's ironic,
yeah.
is a lot of these, anti-Zionist, let's say Haredim, I just pose one simple question to them: why do you observe Hanukkah, the holiday of Hanukkah? Because it really goes against everything you're saying, right? Why you're being a hypocrite? So and I find that usually that stumps them. That's not something they know how to respond to, because
then they could just say, well, the sages instituted Hanukkah, and the sages haven't instituted anything else since then. That's the one I got.
Yeah, they can say whatever they want, but the fact of the matter is, a group of people united to create a military to take back an occupied, part of the land, and it became a holiday. So before it was given a stamp of approval by the rabbis, this, they did this
post facto.
It's post facto, exactly.
Pasidi Olam, like the Ramban says. I tell people, if you do not keep Yom Ha'atzmaut, and by the way, not because I'm a statist, and I believe that there's anything inherently holy to the state, or that people should have unwavering loyalty to the state. I also make a distinction between state and government, which a lot of people, well, that's a different lecture. I think that if you do not celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut and Kal Vachomer, you should not celebrate Hanukkah at all, especially if you understand the Rambam. And if you do not celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, then you should not be celebrating Purim. And I also know that, Purim teaches us that when we have mortal enemies like this, who led the battle against Haman and all the other Amalekites, and all the other enemies of Jews throughout the Persian Empire, who would have rose up to destroy Am Yisrael, but instead Am Yisrael preempted them? Who led that fighting? Was there some? We know that Mordechai and Esther were sitting with Achashverosh at the time. They weren't the ones who went out and fought. Well, I don't know if Mordechai even killed a single Amalekite. And he only asked Esther to have Mordechai's sons hung. And it wasn't even Mordechai who was involved in the hanging of Haman. But who led the Am Yisrael in that fight? The fact that Am Yisrael smote their enemies in Purim. Do we have a name of a Jewish leader or a military commander who did that?
No.
Obviously, but you have to fight. You have to do something. You can't just sit around. So, and you look also in the laws of, let's say, the Rambam has a whole book called Sefer Avodah. It tells you about what? Korbanos. And also Sefer Korbanos, they're like a pair there. I guess it was only because of technical reasons Maimonides actually divided the two into two separate books. And you also have, right after that, the laws of Tahara. How many Jewish people open that up and think of this as their Shulchan Aruch? It's not touched on by any of the other codes. Anything in Avodah, Korbanos, and Tahara, well, maybe just a little bit of, even Nida itself. The Rambam surprisingly didn't include Hilchos Nida in Sefer Tahara. Where do you put it? In Kedusha. So Kedusha talks about kashrus. It's kashrus and Nida and the forbidden relations. So that you could find in Yoredeah, right? And in Even Ezer. But everything else that the Rambam put into these three books, it's not spoken about by anybody. But for the Rambam, this was real. This was something that you had to do. And by the way, the Rambam says, Sefer Avodah, in one of the first sections, Zilchos Beis Bechira, he talks about the mitzvah of Mora Mikdash. For many people, Mora Mikdash is not a mitzvah that's on the radar. And like I pointed out last week, I got good news. There was an organization that called themselves Mora HaMikdash. To them, Mora Mikdash, reverence for the temple. You know what their shtick was? Telling people not to go to Har Bayis. Right? Just stay away from Har Bayis out of respect, out of reverence to the temple. You can't go there. Whereas the Rambam, what's his definition of Mora Mikdash? Have you seen this? He says, for the Rambam, Mora Mikdash means going to visit the temple, which he calls, by the way, even in its state of destruction, like it is now, it's still a temple, visiting the temple and going to the parts of the temple complex which are permissible.
Right.
So these are pieces of halacha, basic Jewish practice that have been left out of other codes. That's why you have to learn Mishneh Torah, because you see it, the Rambam, when he begins to tell you about the halachas, he tells you what is lichatila, what is you're supposed to do from the outset. Rabbi Barchim said as much also. He said that at least for the future, from now and going forward, the Rambam and what he wrote serves as, I guess, an even better Shulchan Aruch. Starting from being saying that can unite all of Am Yisrael. Yes, perhaps there are certain halachas that there are major machlokas in. Starting with the Ravad, perhaps not every single halacha is exactly as the Rambam said, but as for a framework, he's the Rosh Yeshiva, so we should begin to study from there. Yeah, Rav Tzuriel told me he always studied the Rambam for halacha. His son said after he passed away that when they were younger, he made sure that they would just study as much Rambam as possible. Read Mishneh Torah. He said that we weren't reading other things. He just made us read Mishneh Torah. Finished Mishneh Torah. By the way, I don't think Rabbi Barchim is too wild about Chabad. There's some issues there, But thank God I don't know Chabadniks like that. I don't know any Messianic types or anybody who Chas v'Shalom worships the Rebbe. But I do know among the good ones, the ones who are not like that, they also tried to study Mishneh Torah on a regular basis, and they even tried to finish their study of the entire halacha, the entire compendium, on a yearly basis. And I'm not telling you you should become a Chabadnik.
The Lubavitcher Rebbe instructed his Hasidim to do that.
Yeah, so that's a very good thing. I think that, yes, aside from everything else you should be learning on a regular basis and have a yearly cycle, you should study the Mishneh Torah and the Mishnah itself, the Mishneh Torah and the Mishnah with the Kamatz. Those are all things that you should really put yourself to. I think it's chaval that even I try to study these things and there's so many things I forget. It's a shame we didn't do these when we were younger. How can you have that the Jewish school system doesn't drive these into the kids' heads at a young age? That's what you're supposed to do with Mishnayos. That's what you're supposed to do with Tanakh. And whatever, I'm not going to get against the system, but thank God here in Eretz Yisrael, we do have that as an option nowadays. You could send your son to a school where they will have him reciting Psukim, Tanakh, Torah, Mishnayos, and even some halachas. And even this is a cool trick they have, piyutim, that encode halachas and lists of information like the Taryag mitzvos and all that. I think it's a wonderful thing. And I strongly encourage everybody to get out of there. It's worth making aliyah for your family's sake, just so that your children can be educated in the land of Israel. Tell it to everybody. I don't know what your considerations are while you're living in America for whatever reason or anywhere else in Hutzlar. Just to know for your children, the best thing you could do for them is to send them to study Torah in the land of Israel and study in Hebrew there, at least in my own experience. Say the fellows who are graduating Israeli high school, just the regular yeshiva system here in Israel, even talking about the non-Haredi system, they are years ahead of their counterparts in America.
It's undoubtable.
Far ahead of them.
Undoubtable.
Of course.
And being that we only have, I think, about 10, 15 minutes more left, I want to get to a question, which I find interesting here. There's a belief that if certain practices are not done anymore, it must be God's will. How do you address this fallen out of use fallacy in halakha?
I think it's human nature. I've heard it used as a resort by quite a few Rabbanim. Asked the question, why don't we just do this? Oh, we don't do that anymore, so I guess we don't do that.
What's
yeah, it started happening more frequently after I made Aliyah. I thought that this is something that's endemic to Chutzlaretz, but actually happened even more so since I came here. I'm thinking of certain people consciously. They said this. Like why not Tuman Tara? Let's get back to the mikveh issue. I had argued with quite a few Rabbanim, and there are many who now, by the way, came to this without my intervention. They realize we have to open up the mikvah more. Why? Because Jews who want to keep the halachas of Tuman Tara know that you have to go to mikvah on a regular basis. If you want to be working in agriculture, you want to produce wine, and you want to be able to keep that wine pure, or you're making olives. You have an olive press. You're the olive producer, and you want to be able to give the truma to a kohen. You want your wine and olive oil to be used in the temple. What's the first thing you have to do? Produce that wine and oil in purity, right? That requires people to go to mikvah. That requires also people to get the ashes of the paraduma. God willing, we're going to get him with that. If you want to have people consume sacrificial food, which, by the way, technically you could do nowadays, if we had a temple service, we would go through the temple service also without removing the impurity caused by contact with the dead, the whole paraduma thing. That's also beyond the scope. But just to know, Rambam isn't the only one who says this, that if everybody is contaminated with this tumat mate, the contamination from contact with the dead, so we just ignore it and we go ahead with the temple service. But we still have to remove other forms of impurity, which are all removed basically from immersion in the mikvah. So I was arguing, and I wasn't the only one who said this, we have to open up the mikvah for women. Women need to go to the mikvah just like men if they want to consume sacrifices, they want to attend the temple. And this is also for young women. Teenagers need to go to mikvah. They have to know this. There's a policy in place since quite a few hundred years ago that we do not allow single women to go to immerse themselves for obvious reasons, right? They'll say, oh, there's no hilchos nida. Now they'll think that this is a chance to sin. But the sages never had such an idea. The sages used to have private mikvot. Anybody who had a farm had to have a mikvah so that he and his family could go immerse themselves when necessary. There was no such thing as telling, let's say, a 17-year-old girl, oh, don't go to mikvah lest you be enticed by sin. We tell her, no, you have to go to mikvah on a regular basis so that you do not contaminate the produce that we have around the house. Or if you're the Kohen's daughter, you have to know to go to mikvah so that you could eat of truma like everybody else in the evening. This was part of life. So you had to begin to open up the mikvot so that people could get back into this, I wouldn't even call it a routine, but a regularity of purifying themselves beforehand. It's human nature to say that, oh, we don't do this anymore, so now we're just not going to do it. It's too easy. And we could come up with, like Rabbi Dr. England says, quasi-halachic justifications after the fact for what we see on the ground. There's I like to say it, it's a mashal that Tyrannus Rufus brought up to Rabbi Akiva. He was the Roman governor, the procurator, somewhere around the coast. Where did he live exactly? It might have been near what's today Jaffa at the time. Rabbi Akiva was in Bnei Brak, and this Roman fellow used to give Rabbi Akiva a lot of problems. As a matter of fact, he might have been involved in Rabbi Akiva's eventual execution after the Bar Kokhba revolt. So he challenged Rabbi Akiva. He said, basically, and this is an argument that is echoed in the early Christians and continues, by the way, for those really from Christians who believe it. God rejected the Jewish people, right? We're no longer the chosen ones. So to them, we're cursed. We're the wandering Jew. The way Tyrannus Rufus had it was, he went to Rabbi Akiva and said, if the king threw someone in prison, demanded that someone be imprisoned, and then there was someone who came and this guy should also be starved in prison, subsistence only, or maybe even below subsistence rations. And there was someone who went against the will of the king and went out of his way to somehow smuggle food to this prisoner. Wouldn't the king be upset at this person? And he was implying that the Jewish people have been exiled, their temple has been destroyed, God has rejected the Jewish people. You're trying to help the Jewish people get back on their feet. Isn't that against God's will, so to speak? And Rabbi Akiva said, we're not God's prisoners. The mashal is more accurately, what? We are God's children. If the king threw his son out of the palace one day, out of anger, he didn't really mean to completely disown his son. As a matter of fact, if the prince was stuck somewhere without any food or any shelter, and someone came and showed him some mercy and fed the prince and sheltered him, that tomorrow when the king calms down and he wants his son back, he'll be very happy with this fellow who helped his son in the meantime. And that's the proper mashal. That's how God looks to Am Yisrael. Mm-hmm. We look at, let's say, certain commandments. We see, could you imagine a cruel person would say, oh, those orphans over there, they're left without parents, they're dirt poor, no one takes care of them. Perhaps that's God's will. God made them into orphans, so we should not go out of our way to help them. I think there was some people who believe this in the Far East. They had this idea, they didn't believe in our God or even one God, but they had this idea that people who are down, they're the lower, the downtrodden, they're meant to stay there. You're not supposed to raise them up. You remember hearing about this in India? They had the caste system, that those who are in the lower castes are meant to stay in the lower castes, those upper castes are meant to stay. They're not supposed to mix. You're not supposed to try to bring people out of poverty. That is an idea that still exists in the world. Now take this to mitzvahs. There are people who look at the commandments and say, well, we have not had a temple all this time. We have not kept Tumen Torah all this time. Perhaps that is God's will that we are not supposed to have a temple. And by the way, that loses the distinction between God's will and what God allows and what God's chayfetz is. Yirmiyahu Navi says that God wants someone to have proper behavior. Ki ve'ela chafatzti b'num Hashem. Right? God desires certain things. Yes, if we see that something has been allowed, we see a murder has taken place, we don't say, well, God controls everything. It is God's will that this person should be murdered. Adarabba, no. God's will is that, on the contrary, people not murder each other. Even Gentiles are not supposed to be murdering each other. Yet, God has done what in this world? He's allowed man free will to sin. There's the opportunity to sin and to do wrong. So if you see that murder has been committed, you don't say, well, this was God's will. It was supposed to be. No, it was not supposed to be. It's actually against the divine will. But he still allows it to happen. So too with these commandments. It may be that the commandment has fallen out of disuse. It may be that God has allowed his temple to be destroyed. But that's certainly not what he wanted. And it's actually, he puts the blame on us. He looks at us and says, why haven't you rebuilt my temple? Why haven't you come back to the land of Israel? Why aren't you keeping these commandments? But too many of us fall into this. It's just our basic human nature. We see what is around us, and we assume that this was meant to be, that this is God's will. That's how it
Megillat Echa is
what?
all of Megillat Echa is well, I understand the Megillah. The Lamentations of Echa is basically longing for the temple's restoration and blaming the sins or it's certainly not something that is that when you're reading Echa, you don't get this impression that like this was like God's will in a positive sense. It's an unfortunate consequence of sin, of many different
Human error.
Human error, exactly. And we long for
God,
I mean, it's literally in Tanakh.
Why'd you make me do it? Okay, I wish I didn't have to take out my wrath upon you. It would have been much easier. God gave us the brachos. He said, if you keep the Torah, here's a whole set of brachot. It's actually quite concise, but it's also all-encompassing. And if you don't do what is right, here's a tochah. Is God cruel, so to speak, that he gives 49 different forms of punishment in Leviticus and 98 such punishments at the end of Deuteronomy? Is because he's cruel? No, it's because he's trying to tell us that the consequences of our actions, our mistaken use of free will lead to these consequences. Okay? That's what happens. It's not that God wanted that to happen. He allowed it to happen because that's part of the test. If there was no test in this world in free will, then there'd be no reward and punishment. But it's unfortunate we seem to want punishment more than reward.
We only have a few minutes, but this is actually something which I've come to notice more and more. And the more I speak to people, the more I realize how much, we talk about free will and then we talk about like determinism, right? And what I've noticed is, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this, they'll be like, no, we really have free will, but there's also determinism. And I'm like, okay, explain that. And then you start hearing like an entire pilpul, like, this, and it leads to absolutely nowhere, because at the end, it's like, they just kind of circle back around. Like, you have to understand, free will means free will. That means no determinism. That they're mutually exclusive concepts. You can ask, how can Hashem know the future while that's a separate question than from saying, my actions don't have consequences. It's two separate theoretical issues over there. But I just noticed that, especially in the Frum community, they're kind of misguidingly accepting both notions that don't work. And it kind of just leads them into a hodgepodge of weird ideas, right? Like, yeah, we have free will, but everything is Hashem.
Right, but
it's all Hashem's will, but I have free will.
But interestingly,
but yes, but no. It's not a straight way of thinking.
But interestingly, they don't see the emergence of post 1948 the land of Israel as God's will for some reason. For some reason, that's not God's will. That doesn't make any sense here.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Thanks to I think Einsteinian physics, people begun to understand the nature of time. Okay, did you notice how there's a multiplicity of imaginative literature and other forms of pop culture. They actually they explore this concept of time travel, the idea of time travel. So my children read novels and they tell me about traveling in time travel. And you probably grew up with prominent movies that also explore this as a plot device. So for many of us growing up where we did, the idea of time travel is, Pasha, yeah, if you could travel through time, you'd be able to accomplish this and that. It would lead to paradoxes and things like that. We all speak like we're Doc Brown and other imaginative individuals. The idea of time travel, by the way, but if you look at, let's say, literature from before the 20th century, the latter half of the 20th century, the idea of time travel never existed, right? It's not something that people use. That people have been writing imaginative literature and creating all sorts of other culture, entertainment even, and they didn't think of this. They didn't use this as a device. War and romance, chas v'shalom, have been used as starting points for narratives, fictitious narratives, and even romanticized versions of how actual events in history happened, right? Mm-hmm. Those are actually the biggest, I think that most of our, I guess, literature, at least for entertainment, revolves around these ideas, especially war, right? But the idea of time travel is not something that you had in humanity or even in Judaism. I don't know what they did in the East, but this isn't the concept that they even talked about. Yet, for now, for us, this is something that people know about. Why would that be the case? What happened? What changed? People understood physics. Well,
Einstein introduced this idea, and now everybody kind of piggybacked off of it.
Yes, it became, and even if we don't understand physics that well, which we're all a bunch of Amoratzim with that, we were told there's a fourth dimension. Just like it could move right to left and up and down and forward and backward, I could also somehow do that in time. Yet we discovered, like Hawking says, that time has an arrow. Even though we know there's a backwards and forwards in time, one of the laws of thermodynamics, the fact that entropy is always increasing, means that there's this arrow of time, as he described. We can't seem to go backwards in time, but we do know that there's a past, a present, and a future, right? And we also talked about God. God is, that perhaps his name is encoded. He's timeless. Yeah, he's beyond time. So it was never something that we could actually think about moving backwards or forwards in time or skipping ahead, being able to somehow go to the future somehow and then have knowledge of what's going to be and then come back here with that already acquired knowledge and changing the present based on that, or going to the past and somehow changing the past to affect where we are now and somehow returning to there. Those are crazy concepts that most people now, because they've read something or they've seen some sort of movie, now they have a concept about that. And that, for some reason, doesn't affect our free will. You know why? Because we know that's just science fiction. Many of us know that, yes, now God has a knowledge of the future. It's all a book. He's seen the movie already, so to speak, whatever it is. But for our intents and purposes, there is just the now. We can't break it. We can't break out of the time we're in. We can't go back. We can't go forward. We're stuck here now. So being that that's the case, we have to use our free will right now to decide what to do. It's still resting on us. We still have to live with the consequences of our actions. There's still reward and punishment. Even these people who believe in determinism, when they say that when they sort of believe in a deterministic idea, what are they really saying? They're saying that someone's read the book. Someone is aware of the future. God is not a someone. Right? He is removed from time. L'maaseh, everything you do in your life, you are stuck here right now. There's no other being that is timeless that could time travel or that could have any knowledge of the future. God's knowledge is not like your knowledge. So your determinism doesn't really matter. It's your determinism is more of science fiction.
Exactly. The whole point of the foreknowledge and Bechira thing is to basically end up explaining that Hashem doesn't know in any way in which we know. So the question never starts. You have to assume that knowledge would be something towards how we conceive of knowledge for that contradiction to exist. But when you understand that God's knowledge is absolutely nothing to do with anything that we can conceive, the point is to get to a point where you understand that it's a non-starter. That's the whole point. Instead, people just they keep taking the idea of God's foreknowledge and kind of putting it into their conception of what foreknowledge means. And so then they have a contradiction staring them in the face. But no, the point isn't, like you said, the point is to understand God is not a someone, God is not a brain, and God doesn't know in the sense that we know. The whole idea is to basically remove all these understandings of God from the picture so that you understand that there is no real question here. That's the real point. Yet this anthropomorphic tendency that we tend to bring into ideas like knowledge of God, and all, we anthropomorphize it to a point where then we're stuck in these really debilitating contradictions that lead to strange ideas, strange notions, inaction, all the things that you don't want. That's opposite of what Judaism preaches.
Well said.
Yep.
Yes. By the way, and I'd like to add that, don't we have prophets? Don't we claim that the prophets had knowledge of the future? I think that's a very big mistake. I do not believe that God gave knowledge of the future the way we understand it now from our pop culture idea. He did not give, even to Moses, knowledge of the future in that sense. What he gave to the prophets was promises of the future and instructions for the future. I'll give you an example. The Messianic era. The prophets envisioned the Messianic era, but they didn't actually see what the future would be. They were telling us that it is our job to make our lives the Messianic era. They were telling us to keep the commandments so that you bring about this Messianic era. And they also were telling us that if we do exactly as God has told us 100%, then we will merit to have this state. But Ezekiel didn't see, let's say, flying cars and modern Tel Aviv. He didn't see that. He was told, Am Yisrael, if you keep the Torah, well, what was the main thing that Ezekiel did see? By the way, he lived in Tel Aviv. He lived in Tel Aviv and Bavel. What did Ezekiel see? What was he told to tell people about the future? The temple. He saw a whole vision, exactly, many chapters of here's the exact specifications and all that. But the Chachamim told us, and the Rama Paskins this way, that when it came time to actually rebuild the second temple, they didn't know what he was talking about. So they tried to incorporate it. What Ezekiel's telling you is, this is a goal you're striving for. Try to build a temple this way to the best that you can. And God will do his part and put his divine presence back in that temple.
That is a fascinating.
He didn't see what the actual temple will look like. He's instructing you how to do it and how to get a promise. And you use that principle also. Moshe Rabbeinu was not shown, let's say, I don't know, whatever the Messianic era will look like. He was told to tell us how to bring about the Messianic era and a requirement to do so. And by the way, this is I guess if we could sound, I guess, almost Zionist, people think that you look at the prophecies of the Torah and the Nevi'im, they'll come true. You know, that's the way it's going to be. It's somehow going to come true, so you just sit back. No, the prophets were giving you a commandment. They were giving you orders. It is your obligation as an individual and as a community, as a nation, to bring about this messianic state.
Such an important
that's fundamental and fascinating. Yeah. I really like that. I really enjoyed that one.
Well, we want to thank you. Sorry that we ran out of time, and we want to do this again. There's a lot of topics that we want to discuss with you, so hopefully we can do this again. Before we go, can you tell everybody how they can find you and find your book?
Yeah, and your books. Yeah, what book? Yeah.
Okay, I guess we'll put that in a link. Find my book. My website is avraham.ben-yehuda.wordpress.com. I guess it's outdated. Some people tell me I have to go to Substack. So send me an email to mahonshilo.org. I guess office at mahonshilo.org. But you can also find the line, and you'll get my contact information there. And also you could find the website. Just Google Haggadat HaPesach and my name, and you'll find a way to order a copy of Haggadat HaPesach. It's very simple. And also we have a YouTube channel. Most of my content now is on the Mahon Shilo YouTube channel. It's also a very easy thing to find if you know how to use the internet. And you contact me through that. And also you should look at the videos. I'm not the only one. Obviously, I'm just a minor part of that channel. It hosts hosts all of Rabbi Baruchim's content, and now there's other creators and other contributors there, especially Jonathan Pollard, who has a lot to say about our situation right now. I think you should listen to him. And also Dr. England is there.
Dr. England, thank for making the shidduch between us. So Dr. England, thank you very much.
Yep.
Yeah. He's the smartest Jew I know, so it's worth listening to him.
Absolutely. We had him on the podcast. He's phenomenal.
And
drummer every time I listen. I just realized how brilliant this man is. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Thank God. It's like, they say there's a bracha you say on seeing really wise people, really wise Torah sages. No, the Chazal weren't joking. You meet these people, you're supposed to thank God, you're supposed to praise him for creating such great, phenomenal minds. Yeah, there you have
Thank
it.
you so much.
Thank you.
We hope that you stay safe. We hope that the matzav should get better. And our hearts and our thoughts are with you and with everyone in Eretz Israel. And we hope you have a Shavua Tov. And we thank you so much for your time and much success. And hopefully we'll do it again.
Amen. Thank you. Good to see you guys.